Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg McPherson, president of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP of Oregon, Barron Liebman, Iberdrola Renewables, Portland General Electric, Providence Health and Services, and Uber. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. Next Tuesday, September 8, please join us for Civic Drinks, our monthly networking gathering of City Club members and friends. We will be bringing together organizations working to inspire, educate youth to be civic leaders. This event is from 5 to 7 at Radio Room at Northeast 11th and Alberta. At next week's Friday Forum, a panel will focus on the problem of Portland's deteriorating streets and how to fund needed maintenance and improvements. The discussion will be informed by the City Club research report on this subject. Please join us here at the Sentinel for this provocative topic. We will have our program during the regular hour, and then City Club members will debate and vote on the report after the Friday Forum. If you do not attend the debate and vote, City Club will email you a ballot. Online voting will be open until Wednesday, September 16 at 5 p.m. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Later in today's program, Norm Smith will facilitate a Q&A session with those in the live audience. Asking questions at the microphone is a privilege of City Club membership, but anyone in the live audience here at the Sentinel may write a question on one of the index cards found at the center of the tables. Hold the card up, and City Club staff members will pick them up during or before the Q&A session. We'd also like to thank the following organizations who helped make this program possible today: the Collins Foundation, DanceWire, Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation, the Ford Family Foundation, Meyer Memorial Trust, James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the M.J. Murdock Charitable Trust, the Oregon College of Art and Craft, the Oregon Community Foundation, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, Portland Area Theater Alliance, and the Regional Arts and Culture Council. And now for today's program. Michael Kaiser was, from 2001 to 2014, president of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. Earlier in his career, he rehabilitated the finances of the Kansas City Ballet, the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, and the American Ballet Theater as the head of each of those organizations. These achievements gained him the moniker of the Turnaround King for the arts. Michael Kaiser now provides his expertise to arts organizations nationwide and here in Oregon. Michael Kaiser will be interviewed by Norm Smith, Senior Fellow with the M.J. Murdock Charitable Trust and former chair of the Oregon Cultural Trust and Oregon Arts Commission. Please join me in welcoming Michael Kaiser and Norm Smith to Friday Forum.
Thank you, Greg, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in the room and outside the room, we have a very special opportunity today, and that is to hear from an international expert who has literally taught the sustainable practices that help arts organizations in all of our 50 states, many of our territories, and as of recently, how many countries around the world? 82. 82 international engagements. This is a chance for you to hear from somebody who has had a chance to look closely at us and closely at our organizations, and I think he's prepared to flatter us, but I think he's also prepared to tell us what we might be able to do better. I want to call out Steve Moore at the Murdock Charitable Trust, because it was Steve who introduced the sponsors listed a few moments ago by Greg introduced us to Michael and his work. And about 2 years ago, we came together to make it possible for a dozen arts organizations, mostly in the Portland area, and one in the Columbia Gorge, to come to these trainings that the DeVos Institute is performing. This morning, those 8 organizations, the funders, the foundations, got to sit in the back of the room, and we sat on our hands and we had our mouths taped closed, while the cohort worked with Michael on something that ought to strike fear into the hearts of everyone in this room that has ever wanted to be or has ever served on a board. We learned about how to get the board you want and keep the board you need, and we heard it from an international expert. So that's just background and context. We finished this morning with the face-to-face work. There's another 6 months of follow-on work after almost 2 years. We hope that these dozen organizations will be able to perform even more successfully in the ecology, the arts ecology, across the state and across the region. So, Michael, I think we need to know a little bit more about you. If you could take up where Greg left off for a moment and just call out a couple of highlights of your career that then launched you into this passionate work all over the world.
Well, I wanted to be an opera singer, and I was really bad. And so I gave that up pretty quickly. I ended up in the corporate sector as a consultant helping corporations with their long-range planning, always knowing that somewhere along the way I wanted to get back to the arts. And I was invited to join the board of the Washington Opera in Washington, D.C., and I was one of the worst board members in history because I really wanted to be a staff member. So I kept interfering with everything that the staff was doing. And one day I finally realized I wanted to be a staff member, and so I sold my business, my consulting business, and looked for a job, and got a job through a client of mine with the only place that would hire me, which was a bankrupt ballet company in Kansas City. And I worked with the staff and with the board, and we fixed that organization. And then I started to work with larger and larger organizations. I was mentioned the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and then American Ballet Theater, and then I was fortunate enough to be offered the job to run the Royal Opera House in London, which had a $30 million deficit at the time, and we fixed that. And so over time, when you spend all your time working with very sick organizations, you start to realize what creates health. And the more I worked with organizations, the more I talked with my peers, I realized that this was a very young career, arts management. There really wasn't a lot codified, and there really was a need to disabuse ourselves of things that we thought were true but maybe not true. And so a lot of my passion has been directed towards helping other arts organizations to fix themselves. And the DeVos Institute I formed while I was at the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center has a nomenclature of the National Cultural Center, and one way I felt we could serve the nation was to help other arts organizations in need. And so we built this institute that teaches arts managers and consults to arts organizations throughout the US and across the globe, trying to create healthier arts institutions.
And it's exquisitely simple after Michael explains it, but I don't think I have it quite down yet. So for those of you that feel a need to maybe continue and work like this, I encourage it. Can you tell us a little bit about the cycle that you were using today? You opened a year and a half ago with a cycle that really, I think, pulls together the hard work that has to be done to create exciting art.
Well, what I realized when you work with troubled organizations, there's a natural tendency to want to save your way to health. That is, to cut the budget, to say, well, we don't have any money, so we better spend less. And what happens invariably when organizations cut, and they cut their art, and they cut their marketing, and they get less interesting, they lose whatever support they have, and they get sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And what I realized was the only way to make an arts organization healthy was to do really vibrant, important, exciting art, and to market that art really well. And what I realized was when you do that, when you create on an ongoing basis really amazing projects, and when you market them extremely well, you pull to the organization people who want to help you. I call that group the family. Those are the donors and the audience members and the board members and the volunteers. And the happier and more engaged that family is, the more money you get. And when you take that money and put it into more great art and then market it really well, your family gets happier and bigger and more engaged, and you get more money. And that positive cycle is what characterizes healthy arts organizations and, frankly, healthy not-for-profit organizations, whether they're universities or hospitals or educational institutions or whatever. And what we do to ourselves is we make ourselves sick, because when we get a little financial problem, we cut the art, we cut the marketing, our family looks elsewhere, we have less money, so we do less art and less money, and the family looks elsewhere, and we get sicker and sicker. So it's that cycle that I realize we have to install in arts organizations. We have to really focus on the quality of our work, the excitement of our work. We really have to focus on very strong and sophisticated marketing, and we also have to be very embracive and pull our family to us. And if we do that, we are much more likely to have a successful, sustainable arts organization.
The 12 groups that participated, and many of them are represented in the room today, include Artist Repertory Theater, Chamber Music Northwest, Columbia Center for the Arts in Hood River, Disjecta Contemporary Arts Center, Metropolitan Youth Symphony, and if you want to break out in applause for any of these groups, feel free. Miracle Theater Group, which is Milagro, the Northwest Film Center, Oregon Ballet Theater, Oregon Historical Society, and there were dates by these institutions, and I was thinking, well, of course, Oregon Historical Society, 1898, and then the Oregon Symphony Association, 1896, Profile Theater, and Tears of Joy Theater. Now, this cohort was, yes, by all means. These groups have been working diligently, and I've already heard today, as did many of the other funding groups, the value that they've received from this program being here. This group started out, like most groups, kind of wondering what they were getting into, I'm guessing. And you've seen this probably in many, many cities or states or countries. So what was the Oregon Cohort like, if you could describe it, a year and a half ago? And how did you feel about it today as a group, as individuals, when you wrapped up your final presentation to them?
Well, I'm very modest about our contribution. This is an amazing arts ecology you have in this city. You have wonderful arts institutions. These 12 organizations were wonderful before we got here, and they'll be wonderful long after we are gone. I think what we tried to do was to put a focus on a couple of the key topic areas that we think need addressing, and we did this in several ways. We did this through classes. We gave 5 seminars throughout this year and a half. We did it through online classes where we would gather together on a website and sort of talk through. And then we did it with what I think is the most important piece, which is one-on-one mentoring. Every one of the 12 groups got a mentor. I personally was a mentor for 4 of the groups, and every month would have a phone call with the leadership of the staff and/or board of that group for the last year and a half, and we'll continue for another half a year doing that. And really what we hope to be are sounding boards where we bring some ideas, but the real focus is on how to apply those ideas for these organizations. And this was a very diverse set of arts organizations, a very rich set, and a very with a lot of longevity to them and a real history to them. It was a great cohort to work with.
Have you heard feedback from them individually or as a group? And if so, what's your sense?
I think each group we work with, we get different feedback because there are different issues we're working on. We get constant feedback because we know if we're not being helpful, they don't want to have their monthly calls. And it's really been, I think, for us, the focus has been how to make sure that each group in its own way can take what we teach that is useful for them and forget the rest. And I think, by and large, I think that was a success, and I've gotten very good feedback from all the groups I've mentored, and I think there's been real change, real positive change. And It's exciting to see what's happening with the symphony. It's exciting to see what's happening with the ballet company, with Metropolitan Youth Symphony, with the Chamber of Music Northwest. Those are my 4 groups. And it's been wonderful to see their progress. And just last night, there was a wonderful celebration outside by the river, organized by the symphony. And it's their own doing. We had nothing to do with it, but it's emblematic of the large-scale project that we think really does help arts organizations.
So this is the chance for you to not flatter us, but maybe tell us if you've seen progress, if you've seen change, and compare it to the many other cohorts that you've supported.
Well, every city is different, and every city has strengths, and every city has weaknesses. And I'd say the 2 areas that we would love to see continued improvement here in Portland, one is we feel almost there's an over-reliance on foundation funding here and not enough individual funding here. And that's something that concerns me because foundations tend to have a certain amount they can give out, and it doesn't tend to grow very fast. And so if you're reliant on a certain set of foundation donors, you're limiting your future growth. And we all suffer from inflation, and we need to see our revenue grow. And so I'm hopeful, and we've seen progress towards embracing more individual donors, and we would love to see that process continue because there's no shortage of individuals and there's so much money out there. We just need to get more of it for the arts. That's one thing. And I'd say the second is I really hope that the arts ecology here in total continues to work on these large-scale projects because, frankly, I don't think the rest of the country knows your arts organizations as well as they should. And I know there are other cities of the same size or even some smaller ones who have arts organizations that get a lot more national press and a lot more national recognition. And why is this important? It's important, number one, because there are national funders out there, but it's also important because, in my experience, local funders fund more when the nation pays attention. And so I would hope that more can be done to build national profile for the wonderful arts organizations that are resident here in Portland.
All of us in the room that I think pride ourselves in being learners also know that we hit peaks and valleys in our own trek. Is there a possibility that even after you've spent a year and a half with these 12 organizations and these 8 funders that everybody won't be exactly in the same place or equally improved, say, 3 or 4 or 5 years hence?
Absolutely. I mean, people learn at different speeds. There's talent to this. There's talent to being a good arts manager. There's talent to being a good artistic director. There's talent to being a good board member or a good board chair. And some are better than others, and some will learn more, and some will progress more. We don't fool ourselves that everyone who comes into a program like this ends up growing at the exact same rate as everyone else. Our goal is to do 2 things. One is to have as many organizations from this cohort be as healthy as possible. But 2, and very importantly, to have these organizations also be role models for other organizations that can say, wow, that worked over here, maybe I should adopt that as well. And so the program ends up having a much bigger impact on a community than just for the 12 organizations that participated.
And the cohorts that you've been working with are representative. They have a small group from each of these organizations. It might be a board member, it might be a trustee perhaps, or the executive director, a key volunteer. Have you had the right people in the room for these organizations?
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get the executive director. It's a little harder to get the artistic director. It's harder still to get board members. But we love that constellation because if you think about the cycle, you need that whole cohort to really make change in an organization. It can't be just the executive director, and it can't be just the artist, and it can't be just the board. You need all of those groups working together really with a common plan and a common vision in order to make progress. And so our focus is always in getting all 3 of those parts of an organization represented in our classes, in our phone calls, in everything we do with the organization.
I think it's fair to say that what you try to do is build leadership across the country in these organizations, So I'd like to stay with leadership for a moment, and not to pick on executive directors or on board members, but we had a fascinating session this morning with you about getting the board that you need. And if we could elaborate a little bit on both the critical leadership roles and how you recruit the right people for the right time through planning.
Well, I'm a very big believer in planning, and I think that most arts organizations' planning is not as good as it needs to be. I'm not speaking here about the cohort of 12, I'm speaking generally. I think that most arts organizations have plans that really are a collection of wishes rather than really detailed plans. And there are things like, they say things like, we're going to raise more money, or we're going to sell more tickets. That's not a strategy, that's a wish. And I believe in much more detailed planning than that, much more rigorous planning than that. A big part of the planning has to be, how are we going to build a staff, and how are we going to build a board that we need going forward? And too many arts boards calcify and stay the same board for a long period of time, and as the arts organization changes and matures, the board doesn't change. The example I used this morning, which comes from my past, I used to run the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. When I got there, it was 33 years old. We had 36 board members, and half of them had been on the board for 33 years. They were wonderful, passionate people, but they were not necessarily the appropriate governors for that organization moving forward. And so we do need to think through in our planning, what kind of board do we want to have, do we need to have? And I design for my clients what I call the ideal board. It's a picture of the various expertises we need, the various giving capacities, the various knowledge, industries they might come from, but what should the board look like? And then what are we missing, and how do we build towards that? And then how do we do a good prospecting job to find the people who can fill what we're missing in our board? I find too many arts boards get selected simply by someone knowing someone who's willing to be on the board, rather than thinking through enough what kind of expertise, what kind of talent do we really need to make our board complete. And so I really focus on that activity as I work on building a board.
We heard you this morning practice a wonderful exchange with one of the members of the class in explaining how you might invite a person to leave a board. And so if I could play the role of a board member whose time has come, would you talk to me about how I might not go on to my next 8-year term?
Sure. Well, you know, Norm, you've been a wonderful board member, and you've really supported this organization in a great way, and you've been incredibly helpful. But as we move forward, you know from our planning, we need to bring in some new assets, and we hope you might give up your chair to someone who can bring us what we need going forward.
Would there be any role for me to play in this organization that I've loved for so long?
Absolutely. And before I have this conversation, I would have thought through what I thought was the right role for you. As I mentioned this morning, I had one board member at the Ailey organization whose time had come, and she had been involved for 33 years. She had sewn the original costumes for Blues Suite and Revelations, the great works by Ailey, and now it was 33 years later. And so I made her the archivist of the organization, which was a great role for her. She loved it. She was so happy not to feel the pressure, the financial pressure of being a board member, which she couldn't really fulfill. And we kept her in our family. That's the goal here. It's not to get people away, it's to rather find the right role for each person in an organization, exactly as we do with staff. So when I'm asking people to step off the board, it's because I think there's probably a more comfortable role for them, a more suitable role for them in the organization. And sometimes, and oftentimes, that's essential as we take an organization and as it migrates and evolves from a small entrepreneurial venture, as it grows, as it gets larger, gets professional staff, the board membership has to change as well.
And Michael, having been a board member here with you for the last 33 years, I guess I should tell you now, I really appreciate you coming to me because I'm feeling a little tired. My juices aren't what they used to be, and so thank you so much for handling it in that way.
And you know, most board members, when you ask them to step down, they do say thank you, because most board members who shouldn't be board members, they know it, and they're just as embarrassed to say to you, I think I shouldn't be on the board, as you are embarrassed to say to them, I don't think you should be on the board. And so there's really actually just a lack of directness that creates some real challenges with board membership and boards evolving. And so I've had board members, by the way, I have to say, several of those board members who've been on the board for 33 years are still on the Ailey board today, happily so, because they evolved and their lives evolved and their capabilities evolved as the organization did. And so they are still there today, and they are still doing important work for the organization. But a group of them needed to move off. And if we hadn't, the Ailey Company, when I got there, was virtually bankrupt. We had a $6.5 million budget, and 18 of my board members combined gave $5,000 a year, which just was not enough for us to sustain ourselves. And so we had to restructure the board, and many arts organizations do get to that point.
Staying with leadership, and particularly the executive director and the board relationship, first of all, I'd like to call out something that you've written fairly recently, where you said, vague managers always fail. Could you extrapolate on that a little bit?
Yes, I believe in being very specific and very explicit about your plans and your mission and your vision for the organization and the programming you're going to do and the way you're going to market and the way you're going to fundraise. And when you just talk in vague terms, we want to do beautiful work and we want to help society. And if you talk in this vague way, everyone in the organization interprets those words differently. And then people in the organization, on the staff and on the board, if they hear those words differently, they each go off in their own direction. And none of us in the arts have enough resource to waste. And we can't afford different groups of people going off in different directions. We all have to work together, which means we have to be very explicit about our plans.
In the arts organization that I'm part of, how should I think as a board member about being, or who should be, the board chair? What special responsibilities go with that job, and who should not be the board chair?
Board chair is such a pivotal role for arts organizations, because the board chair has to make sure that there is a collaboration between board and staff, that these are not two opposing forces, these are forces that work together. And so the board chair has to be able to encourage collaboration between board members and staff members. They have to lead by example on fundraising. I do not believe that boards are responsible for running fundraising, for doing all the fundraising, but they have to play a role. And the board chair has to be a great role model for that. And the board chair has to be able to manage board relationships with staff and make sure that people are being polite and civil with each other, but also open with each other. And so you don't want to have a board bully as your board chair, and you don't want to have someone who thinks that the board knows everything and the staff knows nothing as your chair. You want someone who's really going to be able to bring all the forces together and really going to encourage a dialogue so that we can all move forward in the same direction.
And finally, in this same vein, we had some discussions this morning about term limits, and that certainly applies to government and public and private enterprise. What's your thought on term limits, whether it be for the board or for the board chair?
For arts organizations, I'm not a fan of term limits, which I know is a minority opinion. I believe that most boards want term limits so they can see their not great board members get off. But as you can tell, I'm more direct, and I don't want to wait till their term is up. So I would have a conversation with someone and ask them to leave before their term is up. On the other hand, and almost more importantly, I don't want to lose my best board members for a minute. I don't want anyone who's generous and supportive and thoughtful and a good collaborator and a great team player. I don't want them having to take a year off my board simply because we have a rule that says that. So I really don't believe in term limits for board members, but I do believe in term limits for chairs, because sometimes the chair can get so much power, it's impossible to get them off. And so I do believe there has to be some mechanism to rotate that position.
City Club, as I understand, has really been thinking about racial equity, and you have actually several programs that you have promoted to use the racial equity lens and to improve arts programs across the country. To the extent that you have some thoughts or information on this, could you help us understand how the Oregon experience relates to the national experience in this regard? What could you share with us about that effort?
I'm very involved with arts organizations of color. It's a big part of the work I do and of what I care about, because I believe that one of the great, unique aspects of America is the quilt of arts organizations that we have that bring so many different points of view, that allow us to experience so many great artists. And I know that this country would be poorer if we only had one kind of art. And so I am very devoted to building healthier arts organizations of color, but we have a big problem in this country, which is we have exactly one producing arts organization of color with a budget of more than $6 million. And that's the Alvin Ailey Company, which has grown to now, from the $6.5 million when I got there, is now $35 million budget. Everyone else is under $6 million. Why? Because arts organizations of color have relied so heavily on foundation and government funding and have not built the individual donor bases they need, so they are size limited and they don't get above a certain size. And the work I do with arts organizations of color is very much focused on how to build their individual donor bases, how to strengthen their boards to allow them to do that. And I am determined that we're not going to lose our African American and our Asian American and our Latino and our Native American arts organizations, because if we do, we're going to have a much poorer arts ecology in this country. And so we need to work together to teach and train the leaders of these organizations, and that's a lot of the work that I do now.
So we've reached out now a little bit more broadly geographically to a national scene, and I think we would be interested to know, since we are clear out here on the left coast, how do we compare to other cities our size or communities of similar interest? What should we learn about that we don't know?
I think the big thing to learn, first of all, you're an amazing city. Every time I come here, I feel so relaxed because people are so nice here. And that's great. But I think there's something to be learned from looking around nationally at what's going on in the arts. And it's sort of a scary time. I just wrote a book called Curtains, The Future of the Arts in America. So it's not a particularly happy book. But there's a lot of trends that are going on that are affecting the arts, and they are affecting us in Portland and will affect us increasingly going forward. Just a few of those have to do with, number one, the reduction in subscriptions. You know, we used to rely on subscriptions for all of our money early on. We'd get 60% of our tickets sold by subscriptions or 70% by subscriptions. But what happens starting really 40 and 50 years ago, as more and more women started to work outside the home, women were the majority of the subscribers, and as their lives became less predictable, we started to lose subscribers. And over time, subscriptions now play a much more modest part of our support. That's one thing. Number two is the reduction in arts education in our public schools. We now have so little formal arts education. This affects our audience going forward. Number three is the aging of our traditional donor base. There are a lot of major arts funders, individual funders in this country who are getting older, and their children may be very generous, but they're not necessarily as arts focused as their parents have been. That's a scary trend. Number four has been the development of new forms of entertainment, particularly electronic forms of entertainment, so that you can sit home and you can watch YouTube and watch Maria Callas and Joan Sutherland and Leontine Price sing for free and not pay the high prices of the tickets that one has to pay to go live. And then number fifth is the online distribution of arts. More and more and more art is now available at home, either free of charge or at very low cost, at the time you want to see it, where you want to see it. For people who are as old as I am, for us going to something live, there's no replacement. But for a lot of younger people whose lives are now lived in front of a screen, they're more concerned with convenience. They don't care about seeing a TV show the first day it's on. They binge watch Game of Thrones when it's on Netflix. And they'll watch an opera or a ballet when they want to, where they want to. And that means we in the live arts have to work harder and harder and harder to make our art interesting. The more boring we become, the more we play into hands of the electronic media. And the pressure on us to do interesting, important, surprising work is going to grow, not lessen. And I think that's something that's happening nationwide, and I think we need to pay attention to it, whether we're in Portland or New York or Chicago, because it's going to affect us all.
You used those examples in a posting back in May that was on the internet, and you summarized it this way: it made you realize how difficult the 21st century has been for all of us who work in the arts. So you're seeing a definite trend different from even a decade ago.
Absolutely. I think this has been a very hard last 10, 15 years, even forgetting the economic ups and downs which we've experienced, which challenged us as well. But we've seen these other trends happening, particularly the technological change that is presenting new challenges for us, which doesn't mean we're doomed, and it doesn't mean we're not going to have great arts. It just means we have to be clearer-headed, we have to work harder, and we really have to make sure our art is interesting.
At the top of the hour, just to remind everyone here, we'll be taking your questions for Michael, but we have a few more to discuss. Paint a picture for us of a healthy arts ecosystem, and we'll look out a decade. Today you told us you like to look to the future and you don't like to dwell on even the successes of the past for very long. So a decade hence, a healthy arts ecostructure in Oregon.
That's a big one. I think it's a range of arts organizations, large and small, a range of arts organizations in terms of doing accessible work and challenging work. I would love to see increasing amounts of collaboration amongst arts organizations. I think one way you can do these big transformational projects I talk about is not doing them alone, but getting a group together and saying, we're going to bring together our various assets and our expertise and do something really astonishing. And I'd love to see more and more work coming out of Oregon or being viewed from outside the work being done here. I know I pronounce Oregon wrong, I'm sorry. And I would love to see the country talking more about the arts that's being created here. You know, I use an example. I think the Oregon Shakespeare Festival has done a magnificent job of doing important work, but also work that has very broad national recognition. And I think that's a great, for me, role model, and I'd like to see more of that. I'd love to see more of your arts groups get that kind of recognition. I remember when your symphony went to Carnegie Hall and got the most astonishing reviews that I've ever seen. And you know, that's fantastic. I just want to see this on a more routine basis. So it's not one you remember here or one you remember there, but something that happens on an ongoing basis. And there are other communities of similar size that I think are doing that. I'm thinking of the city of St. Louis, where their opera company, every production by their opera company is reviewed in the New York Times. The New York Times flies someone to St. Louis for every one of their productions. Why? Because their productions are excellent and surprising and wonderful, and they've built this reputation for that. And I would like to see that kind of reputation built for the arts in your state as well.
So even the audience in the room or the audience outside the room, feel free to raise your hand with this question, but how many of you have ever had an opportunity to either see at a distance or in person some performance at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C.? So lots of hands in the room going up, and probably what you saw, the quality of that was influenced by this man to my left. The reason I raise that is because if we just had time to pour a glass of wine here, we could hear some wonderful war stories. And I think we need some, is it deer in the headlights when you have a board of directors appointed by the President of the United States, but you still have to make it all function?
It's not easy. But we've been graced with amazing board members from all over America who really are both incredibly smart and passionate, but also really helpful to the organization. But it is a challenge because it is not like a board member who's grown up in a community and has worked with that organization and seen that organization and becomes a board member. We have to work very fast to engage them because in many cases they haven't been deeply involved with the center before they come.
Well, I think we have a minute or two more for a question from here, but for those of you who would like to get ready, please do. We have, I think I'm seeing a couple more minutes. But there will be cards available to take up with your questions, and of course we'll have the microphone over here for you to step up to as a member and ask a question. Do you have advice for us that we haven't heard in some of your other answers? You know, this is a chance to kind of be maybe blunt and tell us what you think as an observer comparing other places you've been. What do we need to do next?
One of the areas we talked about in class that I really firmly believe in and I think would be very helpful to do even more in Portland and in the state is what I call institutional marketing. I break marketing into two pieces. One piece I call programmatic, and that's the marketing that you're used to, the brochures, the email blasts, the posters, trying to get people to buy tickets. But I'm obsessed with this thing called institutional marketing, which are the things we do to get people to say, this arts organization is so amazing, I have to be part of it. And those moments can be amazing performances, or they can be announcements of great grants, or they can be astonishing special events. And the example I've used in class, which I'll review very briefly here, is when I got to Alvin Ailey in 1991, we were so sick, and yet we felt we were so famous, and we were shocked that we were so sick. How could we be so sick? And then the author Alex Haley died. You know Alex Haley is the author of the book Roots. And we got thousands of letters of condolence because people thought Alex Haley was Alvin Ailey. And that told us that we were not quite as famous as we thought we were. And so we put in place this 1 year of institutional marketing activities that was aimed at not at just selling tickets, but at getting people to know who we were and feeling they wanted to engage. And I'll go through it really fast. But we did the Phil Donahue show. Some of you remember Phil Donahue. He was the guy before Oprah. And we did the whole hour on Phil Donahue. Our dancers danced. Judith Jamison, our artistic director, spoke. It was a great hour. That was December of '92. The next month was President Clinton's first inauguration, and I found out there was going to be a gala performance the night before, and I wormed the Ailey way onto that. So in addition to Barbra Streisand and Michael Jackson and Fleetwood Mac and Aretha Franklin, there was the Ailey Company dancing, and 88 million people saw that on CBS. 2 months later, we did an exhibition about our history at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. In July of that year, we did a big free concert in Central Park, and CNN did a 2-minute segment. They ran 48 times in the next 24 hours on that. And the next month, the mayor of New York, Mayor Giuliani, named our street Alvin Ailey Place, and there was a big amount of press around that. And then in November of that year, 2 books were published about our organization. And the next month, exactly a year after Donahue, was our 35th anniversary season in New York. And we opened with a gala with Jesse Norman and Al Jarreau and Dionne Warwick and Maya Angelou and Anna Devere Smith and Denzel Washington all participating. That whole year, every time you turned around, there was Ailey doing something exciting. Our fundraising doubled from 1 year to the next, in part because people got so excited they wanted to join our family, and in part because our board, that had been embarrassed about our financial problems, got excited, and they went to all their friends to ask them to participate. This is the power of institutional marketing, and it's something that I think arts organizations everywhere, including in Portland, would do well to be thinking about as they do their planning.
We're getting very close to the time for your questions, but I'd like to just wrap up with, again, a futuristic one. When, not if, you come back to our area to help a different cohort and to see how the current one is doing, what do you expect to do differently, or do you think you have the formula about right?
I'm constantly changing. The class I taught today, I had never taught before. It was my first time, because I'm constantly coming up with new ideas. Our field of arts management is about 30 years old. That's all. We're really in the infancy. There's a lot for us to learn. I certainly don't know at all. I'm observing, and I learn from my students so much. It's one of the great joys of teaching it. So that I expect when I come back, I'll be doing things completely differently with all new kinds of material, because I'll have learned more from other arts leaders, and I'll pass that on.
All right, so there might be some future board members in the room, future executive leaders of organizations, new programs, transformational art that will surprise everyone here, that will please us. And I want to just take a moment before we even go to questions to say thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Tony Tabor Roberts. I'm a City Club member, and I'd love to ask you, a lot of the organizations you've worked with are rather large, medium or large organizations, and I think one of the things that does make Portland a very special ecosystem of arts is the number of very small organizations, small or even very teeny organizations. And so how can you apply some of the things that, you're working with large staffs that have executive directors, development directors, and all kinds of things. How can you apply some of the work that you're doing to something that maybe has, a part-time staffer and a very dedicated board, but doesn't really know what they're doing?
Thank you. It's a great question. And I have to say that more than half the organizations we've taught in this country, and we've taught in this country about 800 organizations, have budgets of less than $100,000. So our work is not just with large organizations, it's also with very small organizations, in some cases entirely volunteer-managed organizations with no professional staff. I don't believe the philosophy changes. It's just the scale and the number of zeros. And I still believe that, number one, you have to do interesting work, and number two, you have to let people know about it, and number three, you have to welcome people in. And if you don't embrace people, then you're always going to stay tiny. And one of my concerns for new arts organizations particularly is so much time and energy goes into making the art, and so little attention is paid to how are we going to capture the names of everyone who came to our performance, for example. It's something that's critical, because once we know who came this time, we can sell them tickets next time. It makes the marketing task that much easier. So I'm constantly working with very small organizations with concepts like raffles. I think one of the best ways to, if you're a tiny organization, to capture the name of everyone who came to your performance or exhibition, just raffle off 2 tickets to the next performance or exhibition, or dinner at the restaurant next door, and all they have to do to enter is give you their email address. And you start to build from one performance to the next your family of people. I don't believe this is different. I just believe it has to be, it's harder if you're smaller, and it has to be more focused if you're smaller. You can't waste a minute. But I believe the same concepts apply.
Next question, please.
Edward Hershey, City Club member. Mr. Kaiser, in your 5 disturbing trends, you alluded to both the aging of audiences and to the lack of arts in public education. We have a number of arts organizations here in Portland that have outreach programs to the schools. So my 2-part question is, how important is that? And is there a danger that that takes the pressure off the public schools in terms of providing arts education?
I think it's absolutely critical. I'm very proud, actually, that a program I created at the Kennedy Center called Any Given Child is embedded here in Portland, which coordinates the activities of all the arts organizations that are doing outreach. To me, that's critical, because we don't want to address the same child 62 times and another child never. And one of the challenges of the arts in this country over even the last 30 years was that we left the decision about arts in the classroom up to the individual teacher. And so if a teacher loved the arts, the children in the class would get lots of arts, and the next year they'd go to a teacher who didn't love the arts and they'd get nothing. And we don't teach any other subject that way. If your children or grandchildren came home and said, we're not doing math this year because my teacher doesn't like it, we wouldn't accept that. But we've accepted it with arts education, and we've got to change that. So I think the role of the arts organizations in this community in doing arts with children is critical. And I'll tell you why it's so important to me, because we've had this sociological trend in arts participation in this country, and frankly other countries too, which is we would have arts we'd have children introduced to the arts as little children. They'd participate typically till their junior or senior high school days. Then a lot of people stop their arts participation. Not those of us who are passionate, but a lot do. They start dating, they start thinking about careers, they may go to college, they may start a family, and between the ages of 15 and 50, a lot of people don't do a lot of arts. But if you've had arts as children, and as you have more discretionary time as your children grow up, as you have more discretionary income as your career progresses, when you hit your late 40s, 50s, a lot of people come back into the arts. And they come back as subscribers and ticket buyers and donors and volunteers and board members. We've enjoyed that trend for over a century. Now, if we have children who don't have arts in their schooling, when they become 45 and 50, I don't believe they're going to become the board members and donors and subscribers of the future, and that scares me to death. So I think the work we're doing in arts education, the work the arts groups are doing, is essential, and I pray for as much coordination of that work as possible so children get some kind of systematic arts education and not a helter-skelter one.
Win Wakala, City Club member, what is your favorite memory about the Kennedy Center, and what is your least favorite?
Okay, I'm on radio, so I'm gonna have to be careful. I think my favorite memory has to be, I did a project that was very close to my heart. It was about the history of African-American choreography. There's been a tremendous century of great African-American choreographers in this country. And I don't think a lot of people have understood the arc of the work and how it's matured and changed over time. And I did a program where I brought 20 dance companies together, and we traced the whole arc of African-American choreography in America. It was a beautiful project. And one night, I used to honor everyone who was alive, who had been a great African-American choreographer, from Katherine Dunham to Arthur Mitchell to Judith Jamison to Donnie McHale, and on and on and on. And I knew it was a special evening for them. I was on the stage, I was calling each one out. And the audience just got louder and screaming louder as they came out, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was like the whole theater was rocking because there was so much joy and so much respect for these people, these 25 great choreographers who were on the stage. I've never experienced any moment like that in my life, and I'd have to say that was the absolute high point. The low point, oh goodness. You don't want to hear about financial challenges because that's not so interesting, although we had a surplus every year for 14 years, so that was good. I'd say the low point was we had planned a major expansion of the Kennedy Center. It was a project that had actually predated my becoming president, the initial ideas for it. And it was a really quite interesting project that was going to create a museum of the arts in Washington. It was going to create much more rehearsal space. When the Kennedy Center was designed, commissioned by Congress, they didn't realize you actually rehearse before you go on stage. So the Kennedy Center was built with no rehearsal space, for instance. But it was going to be really a beautiful arts precinct, and I worked like crazy to get Congress to authorize, which we did. If you don't know the way Congress works, they authorize a project, meaning they think it's wonderful, but then they appropriate, which means they pay. And this was going to be a joint public-private partnership where we were going to raise some money, a lot of money privately, and we were also going to get some money from Congress for this project because it involved moving highways. And then we had all kinds of challenges that the government was facing in Iraq and elsewhere, and the money was no longer there. And so Congress had to say, we're not going to appropriate for this project. And I had already raised a lot of private money, including one gift of $100 million, and I had to give it back. This is why I look so old. It was really very, very, very challenging. So I guess that was my low point.
Next question, please.
Erin Solenkopf, City Club member. Arts journalism and arts criticism, particularly for theater and the performing arts, has been waning in Portland. including many recent layoffs at the Oregonian. What is the role of arts journalism criticism in a healthy urban arts ecology, and what can the arts community in Portland do to help encourage this?
This is a challenge all over. It really is a result of technological change, because as fewer and fewer people are buying newspapers, newspapers are cutting their budgets, and one of the first things to go has been arts coverage. And this is a really distressing trend for us, because I believe in serious arts journalism is critical for a healthy arts ecology. What's taken its place has been a lot of amateur arts criticism. Anyone can write a review now, anyone can post a blog, or anyone can respond to a Facebook page, et cetera, and do their criticism, which is great, but to me, it doesn't take the place of professional criticism. But I'm afraid it's one of the casualties of the technological change we are experiencing, and I'm afraid I don't see it reversing. In fact, what I think is happening, we already see it in some sports journalism and some political journalism, is that we are seeing the creation of certain journalistic stars who are creating their own websites and are getting great readership. 538 is a website that is now owned by ESPN, that was started as, I believe, a political website, but is now both politics and sports. But we're seeing certain stars create their own websites and becoming national media figures. And it is concerning to me, because one of the great parts of arts criticism has been diversity of opinion, not just one national person saying this is what is good and this is what is not good. So I'm not sure we're going to move. Not sure we're going to be able to go back in time, but I sure wish we could when it came to arts criticism.
I think we have one more question from the audience before I refer to the index card. And Michael, we have a couple, 3 minutes.
Very good. Mr. Kaiser, I'm Chris Metelliano. I'm the general director of the Portland Opera. I recently finished your book, Curtains. I'm still deciding whether to ask my staff to read it or not, because there's some great concern you raise. One of the points you make, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that one needs to build a presence online if you're going to be effective by the year 2035. And you also talk, as you did earlier, about the next generation being so obsessed with technology and losing themselves in their iPads and things like that. An argument someone might make is that nothing, and I'm sure you've heard this, nothing replaces the live experience and the need for a community to come together and experience something live and to share an experience in the theater. And I'm just wondering how you would respond to that, because that is an argument one often hears about.
Right. I didn't say that everyone to be successful has to be online. What I said is some of the larger organizations will be online and will be sucking up the air from a lot of smaller organizations. And the pressure, therefore, is on the smaller organization to be more interesting, more different. Let's not just say, let's do La Boheme because it sells. We have to do work that's really interesting and important. And La Boheme can be interesting and important, don't get me wrong. But we have to do interesting and important work. Otherwise, we're going to not compete effectively with what is online. I agree with you. I don't think anything replaces the live experience. Just the overtones you hear in a live theater are amazing, and the socialness of it are amazing. What I worry about is that more and more people are not necessarily agreeing with me. And so they are comfortable getting their arts online, in part because we've gotten our ticket prices so high that the difference between the cost of online arts and live arts has gotten ridiculous. 2 tickets to the Center Orchestra of the Metropolitan Opera this year, 2 tickets for one performance is $600. For that, you can buy a computer and watch YouTube for free forever. And I'm not saying that means that it's better to watch YouTube, but a lot of people are starting to say, can I afford that difference? And so I agree with you. I'm the biggest supporter of live arts you can imagine, and I spend my life going around the world because I don't want to lose this amazing opportunity that people have to hear artists personally. I am fearful that we are moving in a direction where a lot of people are not going to get their arts live. And what I worry about is in our bigger cities, we'll have arts, but one of the great things that happened in America since 1960 through today is we've had this proliferation of live arts. people all over the country can hear the arts live, and I want that to continue to be true into the future.
We've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. This is Greg McPherson, President of City Club, wishing you an enjoyable holiday weekend. And please join me in thanking again our speaker, Michael Kaiser, and interviewer, Norm Smith. We are adjourned.